There are certain men a woman can walk away from and forget within weeks, and then there are men whose presence lingers long after the door has closed, not because he chased her, or begged, or tried to fix things, but because he carried himself in a way that etched itself into her memory. Most men try too hard to be unforgettable. They perform, they overthink, they overshare. They try to prove they're the right choice, but the man she remembers is the one who never tried to force any version of himself. He simply lived with a quiet confidence that made her feel something she couldn't rationalize. He didn't need her attention to feel like himself, and that alone made him different from almost every man she had ever encountered. She remembers him because of how he held himself when things became uncertain. Not with anger, not with fear, not with desperate attempts to reassure her. He carried that calmness only men who know themselves truly possess. When she was distant, he didn't crumble. When she hesitated, he didn't plead. When she tested his patience, he didn't fall into the emotional traps she unconsciously set. He simply observed her actions and adjusted, not to manipulate the outcome, but to protect his own peace. That restraint, quiet, firm, and almost unnerving, made her feel like she wasn't dealing with someone who needed her approval, but someone who chose her presence without clinging to it. What stays with her is the silence he used, not the cold kind meant to punish, but the grounded kind that comes from a man who refuses to abandon his self-respect. She had grown used to men who chased her confusion with clarity, men who filled every gap with meaningless reassurance, men who responded to distance with pursuit. But his silence was different. It wasn't fearful. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't a reaction. It was a boundary, one she had never seen before. And that boundary forced her to see him, not as someone waiting for her decision, but as someone capable of walking away from what didn't feel reciprocal. She remembers the moments he didn't try to win arguments, the moments he didn't get pulled into emotional spirals, the moments he chose peace over proving a point. He didn't need to be right to feel strong. He didn't need her agreement to feel steady. That kind of emotional discipline is rare, not just in men, but in people. And when she saw it in him, it made her feel both challenged and strangely safe. He wasn't trying to overpower her. He was showing her what it looked like to stay centered while the world demanded a reaction. What truly makes him unforgettable is the way he remained himself even when her behavior shifted. When she became unpredictable, he stayed consistent. When she questioned the connection, he didn't question his identity. When she pulled away, he didn't collapse into insecurity. He simply allowed her to show him who she was, while he remained rooted in who he was. That steadiness became a mirror, showing her the difference between her emotional fluctuations and his internal clarity. And once a woman has experienced that contrast, she can never unsee it. She remembers his absence just as much as his presence, not because he left dramatically, but because when he stepped back, he did it with a sense of finality she didn't expect. There was no explosion, no slammed doors, no emotional chaos, just a quiet recognition that staying any longer would cost him more than leaving would. The simplicity of that choice shook her more than any argument could have, because deep down, she always believed she could pull him back with a single message, a single apology, a single moment of weakness. But when she reached for him and felt nothing in return, not anger, not desperation, just distance, she realized she never really understood his strength in the first place, and she never forgets the way he grew in the aftermath. Most men fall apart when things end. They drift, they regress, they chase distractions to numb the loss. But this man sharpened himself. He became quieter, more focused, more intentional. He didn't rebuild himself out of spite. He rebuilt because it was who he was long before she entered his life. She sees him later, whether through social media, mutual friends, or pure intuition, and notices how life seems to have expanded for him instead of shrunk. And that realization hits her with a force. He wasn't dependent on her. She was simply part of his journey. What ultimately makes him unforgettable is the feeling she had around him, something that's nearly impossible to articulate. It wasn't intensity, it wasn't chaos, it wasn't infatuation, it was clarity. He brought clarity into every moment, in the way he communicated, in the way he carried himself, in the way he refused to be shaken by emotions that weren't his to fix. That clarity becomes a memory she carries forward into every new connection, a quiet comparison she can't silence, not because she wants to live in the past, but because she finally understands how rare it is to meet a man who knows who he is, even when the world tries to change him. She also never forgets the way he made her feel accountable without ever raising his voice or demanding explanations. When she acted impulsively, he didn't chase her down for clarity. When she withdrew, he didn't corner her for answers. His calmness forced her to confront her own behavior. Because she couldn't hide behind his reactions, he didn't give her any. Instead of feeding the drama she stirred out of fear or confusion, he created a space where the truth naturally surfaced. And that kind of emotional contrast stays etched in her memory because very few men possess the strength to let silence reveal what arguments never could. She remembers him because he never tried to control the outcome. He didn't push for labels, he didn't pressure the timeline, he didn't calculate his moves out of anxiety. He trusted what he brought to the table. He trusted the connection to grow if it was meant to. That lack of urgency is rare, almost foreign in a world where most people cling tightly to what they feel slipping away. His patience didn't come from fear, but from understanding, and that made her see him differently, not as someone trying to secure her, but as someone secure enough within himself to let things unfold naturally. Men who operate from that level of self-trust stay imprinted in a woman's mind far longer than any grand gestures ever could. There was also something unforgettable about the way he didn't punish her for being emotional. Even when she spiraled, when she created distance, when she acted out of insecurity, he didn't weaponize her vulnerability. He didn't mock it. He didn't shame it. He simply didn't allow it to dictate his behavior. That balance, being understanding without sacrificing his own stability, is something she didn't appreciate in the moment. But when she experiences men who either collapse under her emotions or try to overpower them, she realizes how rare his steadiness was. And that realization hits her every time she finds herself wishing someone else would handle her the way he once did. She carries him in her memory because he never stopped being himself, even when the connection grew uncertain. When she became inconsistent, he didn't mirror her confusion. When she withheld affection, he didn't chase validation. When she doubted him, he didn't turn into someone trying to prove his worth. Instead, he stayed aligned with his values, his pace, his expectations. That consistency showed her something subtle but powerful. He valued the connection, but he valued himself more. And when a man refuses to lose himself in the process of wanting someone, he becomes a chapter in her life that she mentally revisits long after the emotions fade. What she never forgets most is the moment she realized she no longer had access to him in the same way. That moment doesn't come with a dramatic goodbye or a tearful ending. It comes quietly, usually when she reaches for him emotionally and finds that the door isn't open anymore. His responses become lighter, his availability narrows, his presence feels further away. Not because he's punishing her, but because he's finally living in a world that doesn't revolve around her uncertainty. And when she sees that shift, when she feels it in the space between texts, in the tone of his voice, in the way he no longer places her at the center of his emotional life, something deep inside her realizes a truth she tried to avoid. She is no longer a priority. She also never forgets the dignity with which he let her go, not by slamming doors or deleting her from his life, but by stepping back with a stillness that revealed more strength than any emotional explosion. That quiet pullback forces her to confront her own role in the disconnect. Because when a man doesn't fight, doesn't argue, doesn't beg, doesn't plead, the spotlight shifts. She can no longer blame him for wanting too much or moving too fast. She has to acknowledge, even if silently, that he walked away because she didn't meet him where he stood. And that kind of exit, calm, composed, unapologetic, burns itself into her memory. But what truly makes him unforgettable is who he became after everything ended. Not a broken man, not a bitter man, not someone drowning in what-ifs. He became sharper, more focused, more peaceful. He didn't just move on, he elevated. He didn't just recover, he evolved. And she watches from inside or outside his life as the man she once held in her hands transforms into someone she never fully understood while she had the chance. That evolution is what lingers, because she knows deep down that she didn't lose him in the moment she walked away. She lost him in the moment he grew into someone who no longer needed her to feel whole. What makes him unforgettable is the way he created contrast without trying to. When she meets new men, she realizes how different he truly was, not because he said the right things, but because he moved differently. Other men rushed to impress her. He never did. Others tried to buy their way into her emotions. He stayed grounded in who he was. Others get shaken by her moods, her silences, her contradictions. He never lost control of his own center. That contrast hits her hardest when she's surrounded by men who seem emotionally unstable, men who shift their entire identity just to feel wanted, and she can't help but think back to the man who never bent like that, who stayed unshaken even when she tried to pull him into chaos. She never forgets the way he handled uncertainty. For most men, uncertainty becomes panic. They cling harder, text faster, talk louder, but he treated uncertainty like a doorway instead of a threat. If the connection deepened, he'd walk through it with intention. If it faded, he let it go without resistance. That emotional neutrality unnerved her at times because it made her realize he wasn't tied to outcomes the way she expected, and it attracted her in a way she didn't know how to express. Because a man who isn't terrified of losing her is a man she secretly wants the most. He becomes the one she remembers long after the men who chased her endlessly have faded into the background. What also lingers in her memory is the way he respected himself without needing to declare it. He didn't preach about standards or boundaries, he lived them. He didn't need to announce what he deserved, his actions revealed it. And when she crossed the line or pushed too far, he didn't respond with drama, he responded with distance. That distance spoke louder than any confrontation. It showed her that he valued peace over persuasion, truth over attachment, strength over emotional dependency. And once a woman experiences a man who prioritizes his dignity over pleasing her, she internalizes that memory in a way she can't unlearn. She also never forgets the emotional space he created. Most men smother with their affection, trying to secure closeness through constant presence. But he made space for her to breathe, space for him to think, space for the connection to reveal what it truly was. And in that space, she felt something uncommon, room to be herself. He didn't force her into openness, he let her open at her own pace. He didn't demand transparency, he allowed it to unfold. And even if she never matched his emotional capacity, she felt the difference between him and the men who tried to rush what wasn't ready. That patience becomes a quiet echo she hears when she meets someone new who tries too hard to fill a void rather than let something meaningful grow naturally. But above everything else, she never forgets the moment she realized he was done. Not angry, not bitter, not wounded, just done. A man's silence is powerful, but a man's closure is unforgettable. And when she sensed that he had reached a level of acceptance where he no longer needed the connection to justify his worth, something shifted inside her permanently. She knew in that moment that she had lost access to a man who wasn't just desirable, he was rare. And losing something rare doesn't fade with time, it settles into memory, it follows her quietly, it shapes how she sees every man after him. Because once she has known the calm strength of a man who doesn't break when she pulls away, she never forgets what it felt like to be held, emotionally, mentally, and energetically, by someone she didn't learn to appreciate until it was too late. She never forgets how he carried himself after things fell apart, not with bitterness or resentment, but with a calm acceptance that life was moving him forward. While she wrestled with unanswered questions, he was already shifting into a new chapter, quieter, stronger, more collected. There's a specific kind of emotional maturity in a man who doesn't need closure from the person who hurt him. He finds closure in the way he grows afterward. And when she sees that, when she notices he's not anchored to the past, the way she assumed, something inside her tightens because she expected him to linger in the emotional space she left him in. Instead, he stepped out of it without hesitation. What she remembers even more is the emotional safety he created without asking for anything in return. He didn't weaponize vulnerability or turn intimacy into leverage. He didn't push for affection or force closeness before she was ready. Her comfort mattered to him, but never at the expense of his values. And now, when she finds herself around men who confuse intensity with connection, who mistake anxious attachment for love, she starts to understand the steadiness he offered. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't fragile, it was the type of peace that only reveals its value once it's gone. She never forgets the way he handled her uncertainty. Instead of trying to convince her, he respected her distance. Instead of arguing with her hesitation, he stepped back and let her choose. He gave her room not because he didn't care, but because he cared enough to let the truth surface on its own. Most men flood the connection with pressure the moment they feel her slipping away. He didn't. He allowed her emotional storm to pass without losing his center, and long after she left, she replayed that restraint because it showed her something she rarely encountered, a man who understood that love can't be forced into stability. It either settles naturally or it doesn't. What begins to haunt her later is how different he was from the image she built in her head. She may have assumed he needed constant validation, when in reality, he needed honesty. She may have believed he was deeply attached, when he was actually deeply loyal. She may have interpreted his patience as dependency, when it was strength. And as time passes, those misinterpretations come back to her, not as regrets, but as revelations. She starts realizing she wasn't dealing with a man who lacked options, she was dealing with a man who chose intentionally. And losing the intentional man always hurts more than losing the eager one. She never forgets his silence after the ending, not the kind used to punish her, but the kind used to rebuild himself. There's a particular sharpness to the silence of a man who has finally outgrown what wounded him. It's still, it's grounded, it's final. When he stops explaining, stops negotiating, stops trying to meet her in the middle, she feels a truth she avoided for too long. She pushed a man to his limit without realizing that once he reached that point, there was no coming back. And that silence, that absence, becomes louder than anything he could have said. What stays with her even more is the way he didn't try to replace her. He didn't rush into attention-seeking rebounds. He didn't try to numb the loneliness with noise. He sat with himself. He faced the parts of him that were wounded. He learned from the experience instead of running from it. That kind of emotional discipline is rare. And when she sees him walking through life with clarity, instead of chaos, she feels the weight of what it means to lose a man who confronts his pain instead of projecting it. That's the kind of man who becomes better, not bitter, and that evolution is hard to watch from the outside. What she cannot erase from her memory is the certainty he carried even in the most confusing moments. Other men try to negotiate their value when a woman pulls away. He didn't. He didn't give speeches about his worth. He lived it. He didn't beg her to reconsider. He let her decision reveal the truth. He didn't try to match her emotional inconsistency. He remained consistent within himself. And that level of self-assuredness becomes an emotional imprint, because when a woman meets a man who refuses to compromise his identity for affection, she realizes she isn't dealing with someone who can be easily replaced. What becomes painfully clear to her over time is that he was the one person who didn't lose himself in the relationship. Even when he cared deeply, he kept a part of himself grounded in who he was before the connection began. That inner life, that sense of purpose, that quiet commitment to his path, it separates him from the rest. She remembers how he could give without emptying himself, how he could care without collapsing into dependency, how he could love without surrendering his self-respect. And when she encounters men who swing between apathy and obsession, she realizes how balanced he truly was. She never forgets the emotional strength he embodied in moments she expected weakness. When she pulled back, he didn't chase. When she tested, he didn't crack. When she walked away, he didn't shatter. His strength didn't show itself in anger or bravado. It showed itself in acceptance, and that acceptance lingers in her mind because it forces her to reckon with a truth. Few women truly grasp until they lose it. A man who walks away with dignity isn't doing it because he stopped caring. He's doing it because he finally started caring about himself. And ultimately, she never forgets him because he showed her a version of masculinity that didn't depend on her affection to exist. He brought stability into her world without demanding ownership of it. He loved without losing himself. He disconnected without resentment. He evolved without announcing it. And long after she convinced herself she had moved on, she carries him with her, not because she's still in love, but because he awakened a standard inside her she never knew she needed. Some men fade with time, but the man who held his ground, who stayed whole, who refused to trade dignity for desire, he becomes the one she remembers whenever life reminds her of what she once had and didn't know how to keep. She remembers him because he never confused attachment with purpose. When life demanded more from him, he didn't shrink into the comfort of the relationship. He expanded beyond it. He chased ambitions, built routines, honored commitments, and treated his own growth with seriousness. And the more she watches him progress, quietly without needing applause, the more she realizes that being with him meant aligning with a man who was always moving forward. Most men try to freeze their life when they fall for someone, hoping that stillness will create security. But he understood that only a man who continues becoming more can continue giving more. And that mindset is something she carries with her, even after he's gone. She never forgets how he didn't punish her for her mistakes, even when she acted from fear, made impulsive choices, or pushed him away to test his emotional resilience. He never retaliated. He didn't try to make her jealous. He didn't start playing childish games. He simply let her actions reveal the state of her readiness. That maturity stands out to her later, when she meets men who carry their insecurity like a weapon, men who get vindictive or spiteful or emotionally petty the moment things don't go their way. Compared to that, his patience feels like a gift she mishandled, and she can't forget the feeling of being around someone who refused to let immaturity distort his integrity. What becomes unforgettable is the way he led without forcing anything. He didn't dominate her emotionally, but he also didn't surrender himself just to keep her close. He handled decisions with clarity, communicated with intention, and moved through the world with quiet direction. And even if she didn't always understand it then, she now realizes how rare it is to meet a man who doesn't waver every time emotions intensify. Leadership without control, strength without aggression, confidence without arrogance, those qualities stay imprinted because they're so deeply lacking in the connections she tries to build after him. She remembers him every time she notices how many men crumble under emotional pressure. She sees how easily they get reactive when she's distant, how quickly they get insecure when she doesn't reassure them, how aggressively they try to pull her attention back when they sense it slipping. And slowly, those comparisons form a picture she can't ignore. He wasn't calm because he didn't care. He was calm because he had built himself into someone who didn't fear loss. Men who do not fear loss become unforgettable because they move from strength instead of need. They become the standard even when she never wanted to admit it. She never forgets the way he understood the power of letting things fall apart naturally. When the connection felt strained, he didn't suffocate it. He didn't force clarity out of confusion. He stepped back and let time reveal what intensity tries to hide. And as much as she may have misread that as indifference, she now sees it for what it was: emotional intelligence. Some men force relationships into survival. He allowed the natural truth to surface. And because of that, every time she tries to force a connection with someone new, someone who isn't aligning with her, he comes back to mind as the man who showed her that real bonds don't need pressure to hold. What leaves the deepest imprint is how he treated love like a choice instead of a dependency. He didn't cling to the idea of them out of fear of being alone. He chose her willingly, and he walked away willingly when he saw she couldn't meet him where he stood. That level of autonomy is unforgettable for any woman, because it dismantles the illusion that her affection is the only thing holding a man together. With him, she learned that real strength isn't shown in how loudly a man loves, but in how quietly he can let go when something no longer nurtures his life. She never forgets the days after he removed himself from her world, the silence that didn't accuse her, the distance that didn't seek attention, the absence that didn't return to check if she noticed. Most men try to reinsert themselves subtly, hoping to reopen old doors, but he vanished into his own journey, honoring the separation instead of resisting it, and that absence forces her to see him with new eyes. It brings clarity to memories she once blurred. It gives weight to moments she once minimized. When a man leaves without leaving pieces of himself behind for her to chase, he becomes a different kind of memory, one that grows sharper with time, not softer. What she remembers most intensely are the things he didn't say, the boundaries he didn't have to explain because he lived them, the disappointment he didn't voice because he already understood her emotional limitations, the love he didn't beg her to return because he valued authenticity over performance. Silence from a strong man is never empty. It's full of meaning, full of choices, full of understanding. And as she matures emotionally, she begins to decode that silence, feeling the weight of what he carried with grace and what he released with dignity. She never forgets the emotional depth he offered, not because he overshared or demanded intimacy, but because he was present in every moment in a way most men aren't. When he listened, he actually listened. When he cared, he didn't disguise it behind ego. When he invested, he did it with intention. And now, when she encounters men who treat affection like a bargaining chip or connection like a performance, she realizes how rare it is to meet someone whose emotional world was stable enough to let her in without losing himself in the process. And ultimately, she never forgets him because he represented the version of connection she didn't know how to value at the time. He was the balance she didn't appreciate, the steadiness she didn't recognize, the maturity she wasn't ready for. Losing a man like that doesn't break a woman's heart. It expands her awareness. It teaches her what her emotions masked. It forces her to confront the gap between what she wanted and what she was prepared to hold. And long after life has taken them in different directions, she carries the imprint of the man who didn't need to be unforgettable to be remembered forever. She never forgets how he treated her honestly. Even when honesty carried the risk of losing her, He didn't sugarcoat his intentions to keep her comfortable. He didn't hide his standards out of fear she wouldn't meet them. He didn't pretend to be fine when something felt off. He communicated with clarity, not to demand perfection, but to maintain integrity. And that level of honesty stays with her, because most people only reveal their truth when they feel safe. He revealed his truth because he felt grounded. And when she looks back, she realizes that clarity wasn't meant to control her. It was meant to show her what it felt like to be with someone who wasn't afraid of emotional transparency. What also lingers is the way he handled closeness without smothering and distance, without resentment. He understood that connection breathes, it expands and contracts, it grows and pauses, it needs space and presence. He didn't strangle it with neediness, and he didn't withdraw out of fear. His emotional rhythm was steady, almost soothing. And she didn't appreciate that until she found herself in situations where every small shift triggered insecurity, where every silence felt personal, where every disagreement turned into chaos. Only then did she fully grasp how peaceful it felt to be with a man who wasn't threatened by the natural ebb and flow of intimacy. She never forgets how he stayed true to his path, even when love tried to pull him off course. Many men abandon their goals the moment they fall for someone. They let emotions override discipline. They neglect their mission in hopes of securing affection, but he didn't do that. He knew that losing himself to keep someone else close would only weaken both of them, so he stayed committed to his direction, his growth, his responsibilities. And that unwavering focus becomes something she recalls every time she meets a man who gets lost in her attention, mistaking intensity for strength. His life continued to move forward, and watching that from a distance reminds her of the foundation he stood on, a foundation she once took for granted. What leaves a lasting mark is how he held compassion without losing discernment. He could listen without absorbing her chaos. He could care without carrying her emotional burdens. He could empathize without enabling unhealthy patterns. That level of emotional balance is so rare that she didn't even recognize its value until it was gone. Now, when she interacts with men who either shut down her emotions or drown in them, she feels the sharp contrast of someone who once navigated her internal storms with a kind of quiet wisdom, and the absence of that wisdom becomes something she feels more profoundly than she ever expected. She never forgets the moment she realized he had stopped waiting for her. It's subtle at first. The energy shifts, the tone changes, the emotional warmth cools just slightly, and then it becomes unmistakable. He no longer holds space for her indecision. He no longer pauses his life to see if she'll return. He no longer looks at her the way he once did. That realization doesn't break her, it humbles her, because it's the moment she sees him not as someone she can summon with affection, but as someone who has stepped into a new version of himself, where her uncertainty has no place. That's when the missing becomes permanent. What stays with her is how he never needed to announce his worth. Men who lack confidence usually compensate by talking about themselves, boasting achievements, using charm as a shield, but he didn't need to perform. She felt his value in the way he treated himself, the way he carried himself, the way he honored what he believed in. His self-worth was quiet, but undeniable, and now, when she meets men who try to convince her of their value, she sees the difference instantly, because real worth never needs a monologue. It's felt, not negotiated. She also never forgets how he handled conflict, not by escalating it, not by shutting down, but by creating an emotional environment where solutions could breathe. He didn't try to win every argument. He tried to understand the moment. He didn't try to dominate. It wasn't about ego. He didn't walk away just to prove a point. If he walked away, it was because the connection wasn't honoring who he was. And those distinctions matter because they reveal the difference between a man who seeks power and a man who seeks peace. She now sees the rarity in having someone who could disagree without disrespect and leave without destruction. She remembers him because he didn't try to rewrite the ending. He didn't return with long apologies or empty promises. He didn't try to reopen a chapter that had already served its purpose. He understood that sometimes closure isn't something you talk about, you become it. And as he moved forward, not with coldness but with acceptance, she realized how profoundly he had grown. That growth becomes a shadow she sees in every new connection, reminding her that the men who try to pull her back are nowhere near the man who learned how to let her go. What carves him into her memory is the emotional standard he unknowingly set. Every new interaction becomes a quiet comparison. How he listened, how he held space, how he handled tension, how he stayed grounded under pressure. And even when she tries not to compare, she does. Not to idealize the past, but because the imprint of a healthy masculine presence doesn't fade easily. He taught her, through example, what it feels like to be with someone who isn't threatened by intimacy or independence, and now, anyone who lacks that balance feels insufficient in ways she can't articulate. In the end, she never forgets him because he represented a version of masculinity she wasn't ready for but always wanted. He was the quiet anchor in a world of noise, the steady presence in a world of emotional volatility, the man who didn't chase her because he was chasing something bigger than her. And when she looks back, she realizes the truth that hurts the most. He didn't become unforgettable by trying to impress her. He became unforgettable by becoming himself. And that is the kind of man a woman never gets over, no matter how far life takes her from the moment she let him slip away.